Okay, my name is Joan Neumahr. I'm a career counselor. I work for Skokie and Wilmette Libraries. Jerry?
And I'm Jerry Donahue. I'm a career specialist at the College of Lake County, and I work with the students and alumni of our college on their career goals and issues.
Okay, so we're going to talk about job marketing tools, resumes, job applications, cover letters, LinkedIn, and basically these are all to show potential employers who you are.
So these are 4 questions you might want to think about when you're designing a resume. It's a sort of career planning in 4 questions. Who are you in terms of the marketplace? What are you really good at? We'll talk about skills and so on later on. Where they're needed. As Mike talked about last week, some of the great resources in the library to research and find leads, companies, learn about them. And then how you get there, like resumes, cover letters, and job applications and LinkedIn. So we're going to be doing that today.
And job qualifications. So yes, let's go.
Yeah. Okay.
So are you a recent graduate seeking a new job in the same field, changing careers, or if you've been out of the job market for a while, or both? And we're going to talk about these.
Okay.
This is what are you good at? Now, Jerry says it's your passions, but it's also what you can make a living at. So it's if you think of an accomplishment you did that you're proud of, go back and think of what the skills and qualifications that you had that made the accomplishment work out.
Right. And you write a story about it.
Right.
Write it down, underline skills, qualifications, education, what have you, to make it stand out so you can start to see what are some of those skills and qualifications that you're good at.
And where are your skills and qualifications needed? Michael went through, you could check his program. You research career fields and industries like the BLS and ONET, check job postings and network, talk to people who are in these fields and find out what the job entails and if you're qualified. And then how do you get there? Check your qualifications, but also check to see if maybe if you have the skills, maybe you need to take an online course. Nowadays, so much is done online that, especially if you're older or been out of the job market for a while, it might help to take an online course.
Okay, so we'll do this by sections here. First one is if you're a new grad or recent grad, that you need to really look at where you've been and think about soft and hard skills. Again, writing that story. And then Joan, you have an example down below.
Right. What I did is I went online and looked at some qualifications to get a job as a marketing graduate. You need writing skills, and then check which WordPress, which is now used for website design, Microsoft Office, and Photoshop. You don't have to have all the skills the job requires, but you should emphasize those that you do have.
All right, and then the next area, maybe this is you, a new job, but in the same field. So again, some kind of opening statement to highlight some of those skills and education and experience you have that might qualify you for a position. And Joan has a nice example down below for IT.
Right. Now, of course, if you're an IT professional, you'll probably won't have any. These are the skills that are needed right now, but these are mainly hard skills: hardware and software installation and configuration, and familiar with CCTV cameras, Cisco, and SQL, which is a database.
And then if you're changing careers, so again, you need to look at your background. What were your soft and hard skills highlights, that story again that we started with, that what we call are transferable. In other words, from where you are now, what you've used, what you learned, how do they transfer over to a new type of work? So Joan has a good example of that.
Right. Now, say you're an executive assistant, you want to go into public relations or advertising. You talk to people, look at job postings and see that you need logical and analytical skills, proficient in Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So these are the skills that you think will be transferable that the new job requires.
So when we talk about transferable skills, here are some examples of what we mean by different categories. And there are more than these, obviously. But when you look at these, you start to see yourself where you have strengths in some of these areas, and that might translate into a new position, same type of work in a different company, or if you're a new grad. So any area that you're looking at here can lead you to add these to your resume and to explain them in the interview.
And these are what we call the soft skills. Managing multiple projects, preparing budgets, interpreting new information. Look what the job requires and then figure out how your skills are transferable.
And we're going to talk a little bit today about keywords, because as some of you already know, that many companies now are using applicant tracking systems, which we're going to talk about a little bit here. And they're going to be looking for words that are related to the job posting. So Joan has some nice ideas here on this.
Right. Let's go to the next one, I think.
Okay.
And then,
so here you are.
These are actual jobs, especially in our community. There are so many people who speak multiple languages and never think to mention that. That's a wonderful skill. You've got bilingual with people skills, or your 10 years experience. Everyone seems to use Microsoft Office, Excel. So if you're not proficient in it, take a class. I really advise to. And our detail-oriented event planning. These are just some of the soft and hard skills that the job requires that you would put in if you have these.
Okay. So what are your keywords? So here's where this idea comes from. Applicant tracking, Joan.
Hiring manager, it's so easy these days to upload your resume or download when you see something in Indeed. So, but realize that hiring managers can get up to 250 resumes and they're not going to read it. So they screen and filter based on the keywords.
And this is usually software packages they buy and use in an HR human resource area, so that a human being doesn't even look at your resume. It's all an algorithm. That you may have heard that term, but it's the keywords from the job description that they put into that algorithm. And that's how they sort out people. The resume, cover letter, what you put on there makes a world of difference as to whether you'll even get acknowledged and get an interview.
Right.
And
And
so here's how they do it.
they're graded by appearance in the document and relevance to the position. And hard skills are usually more important than soft skills, but both are. And it's important that you read the job posting and understand if you're qualified, apply. What happens, I think, is so many people just send their resume and they're not qualified. So it's important that you make sure that you have the qualifications for the job.
Right, because this is to get you the interview. I mean,
Yeah.
This is where you have to be smart about it when you're applying. That, as Joan is saying, are you qualified? If you are, you'll be able to put in keywords that make sense to the employer, where you'll have a chance to get an interview.
And this is JobScan. There are several websites where you can upload your resume, paste it in, and it'll tell you how close you come. Do your skills match the job?
And this is one of many software packages to help you. So check it out, jobscan.co, as a resource for you when you're applying and you have to write a resume, cover letter. Okay, am I doing exactly what I should to get an interview? What's my match rate? You're of course trying to get to 100% is not always possible, but at least you want to get an interview out of it. So this is a company job scan that does help you in this regard. So keep this one in mind.
Okay, so now when you're writing your resume, the other thing to remember is you should always use action verbs when writing your resume in your job applications, cover letters, and on LinkedIn. And we have some samples of what action verbs are.
And here you are, alphabetical. So these are just examples, but you can Google and find out more action verbs online, but it gives you an idea of what to use. These are past tense, not present tense. So watch your tense when you're writing your resume. But it gives you an idea. Go ahead.
And try to avoid a lot of adjectives. You don't have to say you're an outstanding writer. Say you achieved writing brochures. In other words, give examples. I've noticed that people tend to use a lot of flowery, they use a thesaurus, and it's not really appropriate.
Right. You're always thinking of those keywords.
Yes.
Okay. So here are some examples. This is an example of a chronological resume, one where you're listing your job experience. And we're encouraging you to keep it to one page. We know some of you will have many years of experience and want to have longer resume. But remember, think of the employer that has to read this stuff. And if it doesn't apply, it's extraneous information and just your life history, they're not going to look at all of that stuff.
Right. And also we recommend that just go job past 10 years is probably far enough that you have to go back.
Right. So you can see here the layout. You can use 1/2-inch margins. You can use the left-hand margin for the key. Most people in the United States read from left to right and it's top down. So if a human being is looking at this like an HR or a manager, they probably are going to scan it and give you 30 seconds or less. So the headings you can see are in caps. They should be bold to make it easy to read. And bullet points, the little dots with the action verbs, past or present tense, to illustrate what you have done, your accomplishments, and so on, like Joan was mentioning. Okay.
Now this is if you've been out of the workforce for a while or are changing jobs, this is a skills-based or functional resume where you would put your transferable skills on top. And then it again would be the skills that the employer is looking for. And then you would put in your job experience, and if you don't have anything comparable, you can just list them.
Now, if we have new grads on here, or recent grads from like a college within the last 2 or 3 years, the education you see on the bottom here, that could move up. It's going to depend on what was your program, your degree area, and does it relate to the job? Again, it's always about getting an interview. And so you've got to give the reader, the employer, the right type of information to say, yes, let's bring in Joshua Brown. He looks like, he has the right background for this position. All right, let's move on to another one.
Okay, this is pretty simple. You no longer have to put your address on it unless you're applying for a job in the city of Chicago and that's a requirement. But pretty much your email account, your phone number, and your LinkedIn profile is very good to put in.
Right.
Keep it simple.
Okay. Yeah.
And now here are 2 examples. If you're changing careers, it would be a short review of your transferable skills. If you're seeking a new job in the same field, say that. And again, you're putting in details. You're saying 4 years experience processing over 80 calls a day. You don't have to say you're a fantastic customer service professional. You show that you have done that. I think that's a little more important.
It's all about the metrics and the details, absolutely. And so these would go near the top of your resume. It's like a starting point for the reader to start to see what you're really all about and do you match what they're looking for.
And you had
Oh.
mentioned, Jerry, that it's almost like your elevator speech. It
Right,
sort of
yeah.
opens up who you are.
Right. And you'll hear this in the interviewing session in a couple of weeks about elevator pitch and how in 30 seconds to a minute, you should be able to explain to somebody who you are, what's your background, what you're looking for, just like what we're doing here with this resume.
Okay, here's another example where we used action verbs. You start with the current position, the relevant accomplishments, and you maximize, and this because this is, you're still working there, it's maximize resume revenue with numbers, resolved receivables, and then maintained accurate records. It's important to put numbers in to prove that it's just impressive.
Right. And then there's one thing, and I think we all have different point of view on this. I like the dates like they're on here on the right-hand margin. So it makes it easy to see those dates. If a person is scanning it quickly, they don't have to go digging into the text to find out dates of employment, for example, or dates of graduation, or dates of certification. So make it easy for the reader. It's the whole idea is to get the, to get that interview. That's what you're after here.
And here's some examples of skills-based where you have where you put the soft and hard skills on top.
Yeah, so this one, again, we show you examples of how they're different, but they can still be included on the same resume. Again, your guide is always the job description, what is posted there, and what do you have as a background that will match some of that. Maybe not exactly, but close enough. And so remember that when you're writing your resume, each resume for an individual job, right? And what are some of those transferable skills that you have developed and you learned from writing your story about your accomplishments that you want to list on the resume, because that's how you're going to influence the reader, the employer, to possibly give you an interview.
Now, you list your education. Now, which is fine. If you decide to put additional technical skills, hobbies, or other stuff, it should be specific for the job. So be careful. If you like to play tennis and you're applying for a job in IT, it might not be applicable.
Right. So again, and then sometimes if you're involved in sports, is it an individual sport or is it a team sport? Because as you know, teamwork in many jobs is really important. So if you had space and you were trying to show that you're a good team player, that people like to say, I'm a good team player. Oh, okay, well, I participated, I was on a baseball team in high school or college or tennis team or what have you, but is it an individual sport or is it a team sport? Sometimes that makes a difference in the thinking of the employer.
And this
then
is
here we, because we're dealing with libraries here,
yeah.
right? So,
yeah.
Go ahead, Joan.
I was just going to say this is a great, these are great resources that the libraries have, and to check them out. They have more details.
Right. These are, Martin Yates is a noted author of these type of books, his series called Knock 'em Dead, and he updates these on a regular basis. There are many books out there. We're going to encourage you to at least check your local library like Skokie to see if in fact they have a more recent edition. I'm going to say at least 2017 and beyond, because as you're seeing here, this whole world of job search is changing quickly. Technology changes, and so you want to look for using or an online service that's very up to date and not giving you bad information from like 10 years ago. So be aware of that when you look at books, what's the publication date? That can make a difference.
Okay, now job applications. Most of them these days are done online, but even so, you really you're going to have to log in and have a password, and please remember to write them down. And then bring your reference lists, your resume, your social security card, so you have all the information, and make sure you're allowed for at least 2 hours. Now, sometimes you don't have to finish you can come back later, but that's why it's important to make sure you know the login name and the password. And if you've applied for multiple jobs, keep track of all of them, please.
So here you are.
This is something Jerry mentioned. If you fill out in person, make sure you can read it. Sometimes people write messy, and you should always proof whatever you've done.
And so this one, if it's just an app, you don't, they say, well, you don't need a resume. It's an hourly job at Walmart or something, and just fill out the app. Remember the key words. Look at what the job description, just like if you were doing a resume, look at the job description, and you can include some of those keywords when you talk about your experience. If you have some experience that's related, you want to include those in your resume, in your application as well. And then review it for just like you would a resume, grammar, spelling, punctuation, right? Because somebody is reading this online most of the time, or an ATS system is reading it. And so you want to make a good impression. So be careful on this. Like Joan is saying, allow plenty of time in order to do this. Don't try and do it in 5 minutes. You really need to get all the information necessary, as Joan was saying there, your driver's license, your reference names, all that sort of information, previous employer history. So have your resume out there.
And sometimes even if you've gotten the job through a resume, sometimes the HR department will ask you to fill something out. So it's important that you double check, look for.
Right. And you can, and bring it with you to the interview if they want you to fill that out. Have a file for this, either an electronic or a paper file, so you have all this information ready to go when you're at applying somewhere and you have an interview. They want you to do that. So here's an example that you might want to take, and if you've done these, you know what we're going to say. It takes time. You can see here how much they want to know. Joan, you might want to mention some of the things on here that we think are really important.
Well, for one thing, know that this is only probably the first page of an application. It's going to go on for maybe 6 more pages, but they're going to want your job titles, the year you started, completed, your education, references, if you're looking for full-time or part-time, how much money you want. And sometimes, especially when it's online, even you can't skip it. The computer is such that you have to fill out. So you have to decide ahead of time how much money it takes you to live, and fill it in.
Yeah. And then you'll see there on the right-hand side, availability. And I'm sure some of you had to deal with this. You really need to think about that ahead of time. Are you willing to work all these days? Which hours? That's really important in some jobs, right? Retail, for example, you must be available on Saturday, Sunday, on the weekend, certain hours, every other weekend. How do you feel about that? Because that's a knockout factor for some employers. If you can't work on the weekend, we're not going to do anything for you. We're not going to hire you. So you need to think ahead on these issues when you fill out the app. It shouldn't be a surprise that, oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about, I work in the evening hours, right? Or maybe they open early in the morning, like Target. There's people there all night, and then there's people that start at 5:30 and 6 in the morning. Are you willing to do that? They're looking to ask about that. So be aware of these things, because these are factors that knock you out before you ever get the interview. If you just fill out an app and you say, I can't work on certain hours. So that's a way to think ahead. We're trying to get you to think ahead and not be surprised when these applications come up online and say, oh my goodness, look at all the stuff here. Well, yeah, the employer wants to know this. And some of those factors are knockout factors. That means you are not going to get an interview. So you need to think ahead on, be honest, don't lie to them if you can't work on the weekend. You're juggling a family, you got children, daycare, all that sort of thing. It comes to play here when you fill these out. Okay, let's take a look at cover letters.
Someone just asked about if you have to put your social security number on applications.
Yeah, nowadays you don't have to do that. That's something that companies are trying to change quite a bit now because of personal information, confidentiality. And that's one thing that many employers now do not require that. And if they do, you can ask about that can you substitute some other document, some other information in that regard. Yeah.
Okay. Now we're talking about cover letters, which in my opinion is probably the hardest thing to write. It's a summary of why you are qualified, but you have to really personalize it for each employer, and you need to do some research. If you're applying for a job at a company, find out what the company does and prove to them that you know who they are and how you think you can be of service. And it's important that you not summarize your resume in your cover letter.
Right. So the big thing I will push is knowledge of the employer, because you're trying to get an interview. Remember your keywords, but also what do you know about them? So that's an important factor when you're doing this, to try and make sure you show them you know what they're doing as far as their products and services. Maybe you even have talked to somebody that worked there. So keep that in mind when you're doing cover letters. So let's take a look here at an example. It's a business letter. You can see it's going to a specific person in this case. Sometimes you don't have that. It's just a website, and you need to look up an address of the headquarters to put in there. This one has a name, that you won't always have that, of course. And then it should have a date, and you can see RE. So you're being very specific in terms of what is the job, program manager, Top Shelf Groceries, right? That's the name of the company. So basically, that's kind of what we're doing when we talk about the whole idea of be specific with cover letters. And then in the first paragraph, tell us about, well, what do you know about them? What is their product and service? Get them interested. It's called the hook in journalism, but it's a way to attract interest from that employer.
I think we have a close-up next.
Okay, so let me go ahead. Here you are. So
And,
as you can, yeah, go ahead.
And I just been working with a lot of people, and it's very important that you not summarize your resume, but go to their website, go to the company's website, or go online and see what they're doing. Maybe they've expanded, and sort of show how your qualifications align with theirs. And it is important to put the job that you are applying for.
Right.
And then very important to include, this is hard to do. This is not easy, but you have to do some research to understand why you think you'd be a good fit.
Right. And then the middle paragraph is why you think you're qualified. And so you can see in our example here how it's got bullet points. And those bullet points should match as much as you can the job description, right? Because you're trying to show them they need a certain kind of background, education, experience. You have it, make it stand out. It may not be on your resume at all, but here's a chance. It's a marketing document, right? To convince them to give you an interview. Here's a chance for you to really show them you have the exact match or close to match of what they're looking for. You've actually looked at their job description and you see how it matches your background. So keep that in mind when you're doing, cover letters. It's very
And Jerry,
important.
you said that it's about 26% advantage.
Oh, yeah.
If they ask for it, it's almost a 30% helps you get
Right.
the job.
So, yeah, it's not required, but a good applicant will use it. It's an extra document. Yes, it takes more time, but it's a way to market yourself, right? To convince them you really want to work there. You really want the interview. So yes, you can just send a resume and no cover letter because people will tell you, well, nobody reads cover letters. But as Joan was mentioning there, a recent survey of HR human resource people in the United States found 26% of them do read the cover letters. So it's not like everybody doesn't read cover letters, and they're not going to tell you that when you apply. So the wiser person will do this, will add that extra document, the cover letter, to convince them you're a good match and you should get the interview. Now, this one is a little different. For those of you that have some decent work experience over the years, so it's not for beginners, new grads, but if you're changing jobs and have transferable skills, or if you worked a while and you want to stay in the same field. So it's called a T cover letter, and you can Google this and see all about it. But we have a graphic here that Joan has put together to kind of show you the layout. It's similar at the top with the address and the date and so on, but then you'll see the brown part there in the middle is called the T chart. And that's the part that's going to be different than the typical cover letter. There you are.
On one side, the left side, you would put what the employer said they wanted. And then on the right side, your qualifications that match. Now, this may not work for an automatic tracking system. This is something that you would probably want to hand in separately, because sometimes column work does not transfer well on the ATS. So this is something you would hand in personally.
Right. If you know it's going to an actual person, just like your resume shouldn't have columns, it should be one column, as you saw our examples there. Typically, you can bold things. You can use bullet points to emphasize information. Capital letters are fine. But once you get into italics and underlining and columns, that's problematic with applicant tracking. So with your cover letter, same idea. This one, it's 2 columns. It's not going to work well with applicant tracking because that software doesn't read the columns real well. Remember, you want to get a high score so you'll get an interview. But we think this is an example of one, if it's going to an actual person and an actual human being is going to read it, this might be one to think about if you have the experience. It really emphasizes how you match the job and why you should get the interview.
This is great to have if you're doing a online interview or actual interview, to just hand it to someone. It says it as well as you can.
Right. It'll help you with the interview process. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Now we're moving to our fourth area, and that's LinkedIn. So we're going to encourage you to have a LinkedIn profile if you don't already. Over 750 million people are on LinkedIn in the world, and it's a business professional networking tool. So it's not exactly like Facebook if you haven't been on it. It's a way for you to start connecting with people that you may or may not know, and that can help you in your job search. So we're going to show you a little bit about that. I mean, there's a lot more here, and we have a resource for you to look it up again from the library. But we think it's a good opportunity for you to start expanding your network. Because remember, number one way people get jobs, networking. And you heard that last week from Mike, and we'll redo that as well. So here would be an example of a beginning page, if you would. This happens to be my ugly picture here, but the idea is you have a picture of yourself. I took a picture of myself in the office, but you want to make it personal. You can put a picture on LinkedIn. You can't do that on a resume. Yes, age discrimination, we know, but still, it's a professional kind of look. That's the kind of picture you want. It's not a Facebook picture, for example, of a family, and it's an individual picture. And then you want to have your brand or summary. So this is kind of what I do. I work at College of Lake County right now. You can put in those keywords of what you're good at, what we started with, your accomplishments, and what you think you want to tell people about yourself. Then you can list skills, which is wonderful, and your highlights, things that you have done, people you've connected to, and you build that. It doesn't happen overnight, but you build it, and it's a way to show people who you are. Okay, so we're going to go ahead now.
And this is me. And again, I'm retired, but I with my featured links were things that I've done. I've written some articles for Fox Valley Technical College. They're still up, so I included links so you could read what I had done, a little bit about myself, and I just took some pictures up on top.
Right, and then you can see how Joan has some featured links. So this is a way to show off. If you have some documents, PowerPoint, stuff you've done at work, that's not confidential, that you can share.
Right.
You can put that on LinkedIn to show off your ability there, again, your skills.
And if
The
you're a
other-
recent
go ahead.
college grad and you did some writing that you are proud of, you can put that in there. You could link that. You could make it a JPEG or a PDF, or but
Yeah.
that way people get a sample of your writing.
Right. So it's a way for you to show off. Now, one thing we want to mention here is you'll see how Joan uses the personal pronoun I. You can do that on LinkedIn, but you cannot, we encourage you not to do personal pronouns on your resume. Okay. And I know you may know that, but I just want to reiterate it because we didn't say it before.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see that people put in personal pronouns on resumes. You don't want to really do that on a resume, but on LinkedIn, you sure can. Absolutely. Okay. And then these are examples of workshops. For example, I do an international student workshop at our college. And so this is my PowerPoint. There's my resume. You can put your resume on LinkedIn, and it can be more than one page. Mine happens, I've shrunk mine down to one page. And then activities, things that you do, talking about articles you've read that you want to show people you're really interested in what's going on in the business world that might relate to what you want to do. So keep that in mind.
And then I put, because from where I worked, I just put in some of the projects that I had done.
Right.
And the thing about LinkedIn, if you want, you can put in all 30 years of your job history. There's no length. You can do, it doesn't have to be one page, obviously.
Right. This is the advantage of LinkedIn. You can put all this experience in. And it shows a bigger background in life and what you've done. And so this is a great resource for you to do that and to be aware of, readers looking at you as a potential person. Here's my examples again, and you'll see here, my workshop I put right in where I'm working now. You can slip in these things right underneath where you're working. So it's a nice way to show off, what you've done at a certain location. Not always possible, but it's another resource on LinkedIn. And then this one, we have seen Mr. Breitbart in action. And when I was at Northwestern University, he was one of our speakers for our students there. Excellent speaker, and he has a book, doesn't everyone, called The Power Formula, and his website there, you can see information and his link, thepowerformula.net. It's great information on LinkedIn and how to use LinkedIn to get a job. And he does a listserv of people to give them tips every week too. So we encourage you to think about this as a great resource to help you get going. If you haven't done anything with LinkedIn, it's a great way to kind of push yourself along, because remember, to get that job, you need to network. And how do you build a network outside your family, your friends, your neighbors, or your coworkers, people you don't know, but might be in places that could really help you get that next spot. So Breitbart, Wayne Breitbart, keep him in mind. The libraries, many of them have his material, but you can get his stuff online as well.
And this is
Joan, go ahead on
online. A great resource is to go to where you went to school, your alumni association. You could put messages on board, but it's a great resource if you're looking at a particular company. Check to see if someone you know or went to school with worked for that same company.
Right. So it's under groups. So when you learn, if you know it, you know where it is, a little box with the dots on the upper right-hand corner. One of those dots represents groups. There are literally tens of thousands of groups on LinkedIn. And as Joan is saying, if you want to check out Niles West High School and see if they have a group, if that's where you went to high school, you will find groups for almost every kind of job you could imagine on there. And those are the groups you want to start thinking about joining, because it's a way to connect with people that you don't know that could help you make connections for jobs as they come up. So keep the group idea in mind.
And here's a way to personalize a connection. You would say, if you see that you're an alumni from Oakton, we both majored in business and marketing. I interned at a company, and if you have free time, I'd love to learn more about what you do. And you notice you're not asking for a job, you're just asking to talk to them.
Right. And so like next week, Marty Gebauer is going to talk about informational interviewing. It blends in nicely here with LinkedIn, where you're just trying to talk to people about their background and what do you do and how did you get there, not for a job, as Joan was saying. So next week you'll learn more about if you haven't done it already, informational interviewing. It's a way to build your knowledge base about career areas, about jobs. And so this is a great tool, LinkedIn, to start connecting with people that you have no idea who they are, but they're doing maybe the job you want. It may not be in Chicago, but who cares? It's still the job you want. What are the skills, education, so on, background they have that might match? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about using LinkedIn and connecting with people.
And again, they also have jobs are posted. You can apply, it tells you the skills, and it explains the job. So it's another way to look for the job description.
And you can even as I have, although I have a job now, but I have a place you can go on to LinkedIn and put in a job request, and it'll give you every day a list of what comes in, whether you match or not, and you can take a look at those. So this is in addition to other resources you're using like Indeed and Simply Hired, you can use this one again to look for jobs on the LinkedIn, and then the jobs tab, and you type in where it is and what you're looking for. And from there, you'll start to see jobs popping up, and they're posted on LinkedIn because that's what companies do now. They look for talent. And one of the places they look is LinkedIn. So that's our summary. And you'll see the library's posted there as well to contact them for further information. I happen to work at Glenview as a volunteer to work with Glenview patrons on their questions. And all the libraries have, like Joan and I, volunteers to help you out with your specific questions. So I'm going to stop my share. There we are. And if you have questions, now is the time. Joan, any thoughts while we're waiting for questions?
No, I
covered a lot.
It's the hardest part is the first sentence, the summary of your resume, and the cover letter.
Okay, here's one, Joan. How do we deal with a gap in employment?
Well, that's normally we do that with a skills-based resume, but in the cover letter, we recommend that you talk about it. You explain why there's a gap. You don't need to go into great detail that your mother was sick and you were taking care of her, but you could say that you took time off to raise your family. There's nothing wrong with that. Jerry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so oftentimes I will say, rather than the gap, it's also the skills, right? It's relevant experience rather than every experience in your whole life. Like we were saying, 30 years of experience or whatever. No, it's what's relevant, or your skill development relevant to that particular job you're applying for. So you don't have to list every job you've ever had. And a resume is a document to get you an interview. It's not everything. So remember that when you have gaps, you stayed at home. I'm dealing with a lady right now, 24 years she stayed at home to raise a family, and now she's coming back to work, and she has a master's degree in computer science, right? So how do you do that? Well, one of the ways, as Joan is saying, is a skills resume. What do you know now? What do you need to learn? Certifications, what have you, going on for additional education. So don't let that throw you when it's, you say, well, I haven't worked for 5 or 6 years, or I've been out of work for a couple of years. Keep that in mind. Yeah.
The other thing is it helps if you've been out of the workforce for a while to take an online course and you put it on your resume. Currently upgrading my skills at Oakton or online, and that just shows that you're working toward recovering.
Right. All right. And Janet is asking, how do you handle a gap when filling out an online application? Joan, you want to try that one?
I would say the same way. You would just put the jobs that you feel are appropriate. The only trouble with an online application is sometimes you get into where if you don't fill out a certain thing, it won't let you go further. So, but I would just do it the same way. Just put the jobs that you've held that are appropriate for the position you're applying for.
Right. And the other thing with the online is usually there's a place for additional information. And if there's a little box like that, you can explain, I was raising a family, or there was an illness, or taking care of another person. You can add that in there, and that's why I wasn't working such and such a date. But as Joan is saying, with the gaps especially, what did you do when you weren't working?
Yes.
Right? Did you volunteer? Did you get a certificate? Did you try and learn something new online? What did you do? So if you're in that boat right now where you're not working and you're wondering about, well, I'm going to have a gap in employment on my resume, think about what's out there. Like Mike was saying, Coursera, Linda, there's so many resources online now to learn things. And you can educate yourself about which direction you want to go, what kind of skills you want to develop, even while you're at home helping out, doing whatever you need to do there while you're not working for employment somewhere. And the resources are usually free. It's not a real problem. A payment of paying for a tuition somewhere. A lot of this is online. So keep that in mind too. Okay, Linda has one. How about stating house manager or homemaker or caregiver and give the years? So Linda's giving us another idea. Yes, that's another way that you can state your position, if you would, right? So it's a way to show that you thought about what you did and how that might apply, what skills you used as a homemaker or caregiver, communication skills, time management, all that sort of stuff that you can add in an application or a resume. Absolutely. So good suggestion, Linda. Absolutely. One last thing I will mention, and I know we're early, but that's fine. References. Okay, we talk about resumes and cover letters and so on. Make sure that you try and get at least 3 good business or professional references. At least 2. I like 3. And Joan can talk about how many, and you want to get that information so that you have it ready to go. Get those references lined up when you write up that application form. They know you're looking for a job. Let the references know about it.
However, for a resume, but you don't put on your if you a printed resume, you don't say references upon. You don't mention that on the written resume.
Right. And Susan has one here. Other than italics, what are some formatting things that should be kept off of resumes for the applicant tracking systems?
I would say keep it simple. It should be flush left. It should be bold or regular, and that's it. No columns, no graphics. Now, if you're a graphic designer and you want to do something fancy, that's fine, but I wouldn't put it on your resume. You could link to that, some work that you've done or your website, but you've got to keep it very, very simple. I'm not even sure if underlining helps.
Yeah, I wouldn't underline anything either, but yeah, watch out on graphics. You don't want to be clever about that. If you know a human being isn't going to see it, if it's just going through a computer system, it's not going to look good. Even if you're like Joan says, a graphic designer, just make sure it's going to a person if it's all the fancy stuff on there.
Or link to it, put in a link on your resume that they can go check on LinkedIn to see the graphic.
Right. And if you have a portfolio, you can link to your portfolio on your resume, a hyperlink. So keep that in mind. Okay. Claire is asking, what is the best way to include volunteer experience on a resume? Good question.
Well, under volunteer, it has to be somehow appropriate for the job you're applying for. If you were raising your children and you volunteered in the PTA, that's perfect. But or as Mike said, if you're a team player, I guess you can put that in. I think you have to be careful that it's more appropriate for the job that you're applying for, the position.
Right. And then if you've, like we're saying with sports teams and so on, did you get developed skills like teamwork because that was your volunteer? You were coaching the Little League team or the soccer team, right? And that shows leadership and communication and teamwork, skills that employers would look for in a job. So think about it that way.
Especially if you've been out of the job market for a while, volunteer experience is excellent because it shows that you just weren't sitting around eating bonbons, that you were doing things.
Right. So volunteer is a great resource to get and to make connections with people too, right? So yeah, that can be really helpful. But that's going at the bottom of the resume probably, right, Joan?
Yes.
I wouldn't put it
Yes,
near the top.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be further down. It could be a heading. I like the fancy heading, community involvement. I just think it sounds like you're really making it that you're really
That is good.
involved
I
with
like
people.
that, yeah.
Yeah, so I use that as like a heading. That would be your bold and cap heading, community involvement. But you could say, volunteer as well, sure. And then tell us a little bit. Were you a leader?
Yes.
An organizer? A little more about that particular situation.
And it's also good if you're applying for some sort of a charity or a nonprofit to show you're volunteering. That's
absolutely. Because again, it depends on the job, right?
Right.
And so you got to kind of watch what the job description is to go with that. Thanks everyone, by the way, for listening too and being tuned in. Thank you.
Please let us know if you have any questions. Call Michael. I'll be glad to answer any questions or look at resumes.
Yes, thanks, Jerry and Joan. It was very helpful. Yes, there's a number of libraries. Contact your local library. There's a lot of great career resources out there to help you. You can always contact us, Skokie Public Library, or call or email us, and we'll try and steer you in the right direction. So thank you for coming, everybody.
All right. Good luck on
Okay.
your search, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.